In this course, we are learning and reviewing the commentary of Prabhuji to the Ishavasya Upanishad. Prabhuji, in the introduction, gives a very concise and clear explanation of what the Upanishads are. The Upanishads are literary documents that assemble the first-hand testimony of ancient Vedic seers or rishis about the ultimate reality. They are intimate revelations of those who have realized the self. This literature has priceless maps for the seekers of truth. These works are the legacy of the ancient enlightened sages for the coming generations of sincere seekers. Upanishadic literature invites us to follow the sacred footsteps left by the great sages on their path to the light. The teachings offered by the Upanishads are called Vedanta, or the culmination of the Vedas, because for many this collection of texts is the conclusion of the Vedas. For others, however, it represents a true emancipation from them. We begin by asking, what are the Vedas actually? The Vedas are the most ancient scripture that originated in India. They are considered to originate around 800 BCE, before the Common Era. And these scriptures were transmitted orally and memorized, and this tradition of memorizing the Vedas and repeating them, especially the parts that are used in ceremonies and rituals, is still practiced to this very day. The Vedas are composed in Sanskrit, and the priests that repeat the mantras make a lot of efforts to pronounce every word correctly. This ensures that the text when is passed in oral tradition, stays the same. What we know today as Hinduism is actually a merge of two traditions, the Vedic tradition and the Tantric tradition. The ceremonies that you can see if you go to a Hindu temple are, generally speaking, a mix of elements from the Vedas and the Tantras. We have four primary Vedas, the Rig, Sama, Yajur, and Atharva Veda. And in the Vedas itself, there are different sections. Some are hymns that glorify various gods. Some are instructions on how to perform rituals. And some of these sections are what's called Upanishads, which deal with more philosophical or metaphysical knowledge and an inquiry into the absolute truth. And we read from the introduction, Prabhuji explains, the Upanishads are the final part of the set of works that begins with the four collections of Samhitas known as Rig, Yajur, Sama, and Atharva Veda, which were collected in writing in India starting around 800 BCE. For many, this collection of texts is the conclusion of the Vedas. For others, however, it represents a true emancipation from them. From a religious perspective, they can be considered a conclusion, while from a mystical perspective, they are the beginning. Notice that Prabhuji writes that the Upanishads are an emancipation from the Vedas, a liberation from the Vedas. To understand that, we need to know something about what the Vedas are, the nature of the Vedas. It is not just a collection of mantras and hymns and instructions for various rituals. The Vedas are also a fabric to create an extremely elevated and organized society, a society which has four main social classes, like the priests, the warriors, the merchants, the workers, and clear guidelines on how to live a life that is focused on what is called preserving the dharma, or a sense of order, of how things should be. There is a division in these scriptures between Karma Kanda and Jnana Kanda. This is not a like chapters division, but it's the nature of the text. Karma Kanda is every part of the scripture that deals with maintaining good karma. For example, the various rituals and sacrifices that are explained in the Vedas are designed to give the practitioner the benefit of good karma. So if a person will practice these, will do the rituals, he will get the results of having this good life, this moral life. The other section is the Jnana Kanda that deals with Jnana or wisdom. And this is where we find the Upanishads, because the Upanishads are mystical texts. This is what Prabhuji talks about when he says that the Upanishads are an emancipation from the Vedas, because they depart from the good religious life and go to the transcendental. Okay, it's not just about duties and responsibilities and how to live a very pious and ethical life, but which all of that is connected to this world. But this is about moving on to the transcendental, toward the ultimate and absolute truth. This is what Shankara, maybe the greatest sages of Hinduism, who lived in the 8th century, he writes in his introduction to the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. And I'm reading from Shankara's Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, his commentary to the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. And Shankara writes in the introduction, in any case, a man who believes that there is a self which gets in relation with a future body seeks to know the particular means of attaining the good and avoiding the evil in connection with that body. Hence, the ceremonial portion of the Vedas, meaning what we said, the Karma Kanda, the ceremonial portion of the Vedas is introduced to acquaint him with these details. Shankara explains here that the whole point of the Karma Kanda is to avoid evil, to create good. But it's related with a person who still thinks he is a self inside a body in this world. Once you go into the inquiry, into doubting that feeling that we all have of being in this world, once you try to go beyond it, that's when you get into the Jnana Kanda. And this is where the Upanishads come in order to help. Now, to get an idea of how the Upanishads appear in the Vedas, we can look at this diagram. In this diagram, we can see the 4 Vedas and which Upanishads appear in which Vedas. Now, these are not all the Upanishads. These are just what usually is known as the main principal Upanishads. In the Rig Veda, we have the Aitreya Upanishad, which is part of the Aitreya Brahmana. In the Sama Veda, we find the Chandogya Upanishad and the Kena Upanishad. In the Yajur Veda is divided into 2 parts. One is called the White Yajur Veda and the Black Yajur Veda. And in the White Yajur Veda, we find the Ishavasya Upanishad, which is the Upanishad that Prabhuji writes about, and the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, which is also another very famous and important Upanishad. In the Black Yajur Veda, we have the Shvetashvara Upanishad, the Katha Upanishad, the Taittiriya Upanishad, and in the Atharva, we have the Mundaka, Prasna, and Mandukya Upanishad. In the introduction, Prabhuji says that Upanishads are also called Vedanta. The word Vedanta is made of 2 parts, Veda, which means knowledge or wisdom, and Anta, which means the end or conclusion. So, in a literal sense, Vedanta means the end of the Vedas or the conclusion of the Vedas. It's more of a conclusion because, as we saw from the diagram, the Upanishads are not literally, physically at the end of the books. And Vedanta is also the name of the 6 darshanas of the Sanatana Dharma religion, the Vedic religion. And 6 darshanas are basically 6 orthodox schools or traditions of understanding the Vedas. There are orthodox and non-orthodox schools. The most known of the non-Orthodox is Buddhism. But darshanas are, the Orthodox ones, are schools of thoughts, a way to understand the Vedas themselves, and especially the Upanishads, and what they mean. The word darshana means point of view, and it comes from the root drishti, the word drishti, which means to see. So that's why darshana is a point of view on truth, on life, and the scriptures. The 6 darshanas that we have are Nyaya, Vaisheshika, Yoga, Sankhya, Purva Mimamsa, and Uttara Mimamsa, which is also known as Vedanta. From all of those, you probably heard about yoga, which is the most famous one. In this context, yoga is a darshana, and we know that from the Yoga Sutras. That's the main scripture of that darshana. The core principles of the Vedanta darshana comes from the scriptures, especially the Upanishads, but also other scriptures is the Bhagavad Gita and the Vedanta Sutra. Those 3 bodies of scriptures are what's known as the Prasthanatraya, the 3 pillars of Vedanta. You might have heard about Vedanta or self-inquiry, as for example the teachings in the spirit of Ramana Maharshi, or other masters who talk about self-inquiry, to ask, who am I? To try to get into that fundamental awareness of who we really are. What we must understand is that this form of spiritual inquiry is not new. This is the heart and soul of the Upanishads. The other thing about the word Upanishad is that the meaning of the word Upanishad is not so clear. We use this word to call this body of scriptures, but what the actual word, the etymology of it is, what it means is not very clear. And again, Prabhuji writes, the verb sad means to sit, the prefix ni means below, and the participle upa means close or intimate. Thus, Upanishad can be translated as teaching received at the feet of the master. It is the specific instructions received in the proximity of someone who is able to transmit the truth. So, about this meaning of Upanishad, sitting next to the master, we have something that many wrote about, and we can find in the Chandogya Upanishad this little story, which Max Muller mentions in his explanation about this, the meaning of the word, Upanishad. This comes from the Chandogya Upanishad, and the story says it is a conversation between the master and the disciple. The master is the father in this case, and he's talking to his son, which is also his disciple. And he says, place this salt in the water and then come to me in the morning. And the meaning is that this come to me is not just come physically, but come to me for instructions. What Max Muller discovered is that in this, in the Sanskrit of this phrase here of come to me in the morning, the word appears as upasiddhata. So you have this, it's the same roots as Upanishad and in Sanskrit sometimes the meaning of the word is not just the literal meaning, but also the implied meaning. And what he's saying here is the implied meaning of coming to instruction is similar to the word Upanishad, is the same roots. And this just gives us a taste of what kind of scriptures the Upanishads are. Sometimes in the Upanishads we find these like lovely little stories. In this story, the master, the father, is asking the son to put salt in water and then come to him the day after. And the son does that, and then the father asks him to taste the water from the top and then from the middle and the bottom, and he asks him, okay, what do you taste? And every time he says, I taste salt. And then he says, the salt is there all the time. Then the father says, here also, in this body, you do not perceive the being, the sat, the self, but it is indeed there. So it's in that story is trying to convey the idea of having the consciousness inside the body, even though you cannot see it as an object. Like the salt you cannot see in the water, but you can experience its taste. And there is another meaning to the word Upanishad that comes from another meaning of the word sad or shad, which means destruction. And again, we read in Prabhuji's introduction, sad is also translated as destruction. Wisdom has a destructive character because it is the acid destined to eliminate illusion. The study of Upanishadic literature brings us closer to our true nature, that is, to our most intimate reality. And with that I want to end here, because the idea of study the Upanishads, why it's important to study it, is not because we want to become very erudite in Upanishads, to know all the Upanishads and everything that they write. But this aspect of destructive wisdom, it's not a wisdom that you can accumulate and if the more you know, the more you have. But it's a wisdom that destroys the concepts that we have about ourselves. It makes us to question it, to question the nature of it, and see if it's true or not. And that's why and this is the reason why Prabhuji, in the end of the introduction, he finishes with this text. He's saying, although we are commenting on the words from the Ishavasya Upanishad, I'm not teaching Hinduism. Prabhuji is saying he's not teaching Hinduism. He's not adding to you more knowledge that now you will go and know what Hinduism is, and you can go to your friends and show off how much you know. Although we are evaluating a sacred text of Vedanta, I'm not preaching a religion, a belief or dogma or philosophy. My teachings are just an invitation, a few words of encouragement to inspire you to investigate and explore deep within. That's the point. The point of the Upanishads, the point of these scriptures, is not to make you believe or make you accept some kind of philosophy or belief or dogma, even though this is the heart of the religion. This goes beyond religion. This goes beyond any kind of belief or dogma or philosophy. It's just to make you question, make you curious, and make you question the reality of who we are.